Hey everybody, it's the Broken Brains Monday Mental Tip. This is Dwight, your host as always, with a quick tip to keep in mind. I kind of guide these quick mental tips by what's going on around me, what I'm seeing, either in counseling or in the online counseling slash self-help slash guru space sometimes, as this one is today. Doing these weekly, I can't guarantee they're not all going to kind of fold on each other. I think I've touched on this in many, many different episodes here and there, but I wanted to today take a second to address cure all magic fixes, especially as applies to the mental health arena. And this applies to a couple of things that I'm seeing. You always see these things come up when it comes to mental health, and especially certain areas that certain topics that you can get into where every so often a new thing will come along and someone will say, hey, this is the thing that's going to cure everything when it comes to it. And I've been following some activity and some different postings online that have been saying things like, hey, here's something you'll do that will fix everything that has nothing to do with what any kind of clinical doctor will tell you. And some of those kinds of things, particularly when it comes to diagnosis of autism. There's a lot of stuff going on back and forth. And y'all know that I feel very strongly about that. I work with a lot of people in the autism community, people who are on the autism spectrum, both clients that I have had, people that I've known, and other clinicians who I've known who are also on the spectrum. And there's just a lot of misinformation that aggressively is put out there. And so this, the thing that kind of triggered this for me was seeing some people that are quoting a study, and I'm putting my own air quotes around study, that claims to show that you can reverse autism. There's a lot of problems inherent to that claim. I'll get a little more deep into, and the reason I'm saying study like that is that when you look at it, it is actually, most people out there that are saying this, if you're seeing it on your socials or whatever, it has to do with a pair of twins. I should say, two people. We're talking, so twins, two individuals who received a whole lot of treatment, including some that had to do with nutrition and things like that, and both improved. Basically what happened is that there's two young kids, they're twins, they received all this attention, had received an autism diagnosis, and these two little girls both showed improvement, although one markedly more than the other, in certain areas that did tie in with symptoms of autism. That is all. That is what happened. And it makes a much better headline to say research shows that we can reverse autism or cure autism. That's a lot snappier than just saying, very, very specific anecdotal evidence indicates that if you receive a lot of time and money to help with something, that you can improve with it. That one doesn't sound as groundbreaking, but that is all that actually happened. So it got me thinking about a little bit in general, about what do you do when you're looking out for these kinds of things, especially when the thing that's being sold might sound like, wow, this is amazing, and this could really solve some kind of problem that maybe I have a lot of stress and frustration over in my life. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if there was just one thing that for some reason everybody was keeping secret, that was just a big part of this, that all of a sudden will fix everything. So I wanted to give you a few guidelines that I have seen through my years and years of working in mental health, and also working as a trainer and public educator in mental health in many ways. And also, just frankly, in doing this podcast, I've met so many people over time. And I will say I've had my share of people who have reached out to the show and wanted to promote things that, boy, a little bit of a cursory look at them was like, oh, they're trying to sell a special thing that doesn't bear up under medical science or things like that. I've been fortunate not to have too many people come on there. But also, I will say, in this industry, if you are a believer in sort of the indomitable human spirit and the choices that we can make, and that you're looking at sort of manifesting different things in your life, and it does lend itself to a lot of idealism and a lot of magical thinking, unfortunately, can go along with that too. So we have to be very cautious about that all the time. So what do you do when you come across something brand new that says, boy, this is amazing? Because not all of those things are fake, right? So something comes along and it says, hey, here's this new thing. It's really cool. and you should do it. It will fix everything for you. Well, first of all, you want to look at, evaluate the claim that's coming in that says, this is going to fix everything. This is a cure-all. People start using words like cure when that has never been used before, right? For that thing. So if people come along and say, oh, this will cure autism, this will cure bipolar disorder, and these might be things that actually, when we do talk about them, well, actually, we talk about management, an ongoing management with things. And by the way, we could do a whole episode on how it actually is kind of offensive to come along and say cure, particularly things that have to do with autism or other things that are simply different neurological ways of thinking and processing information. There's a whole bunch we can mine there, folks. And you do want to look for that when the people coming along have nothing to do with and don't seem to be plugged into the community that they claim they're trying to help. That is another big one. Flipping back over here to the cure-all claims. Let's compare a couple of different things. So several years ago, there were these things that came out called binaural beats, which were things that you were supposed to listen to with headphones, and they have these special beats that are supposed to activate brain waves and make different things happen. And they're supposed to be like, oh, this will actually stabilize lots of mental health. It will, and there are lots of different claims of what the things this would cure. There are even people who developed some of these. There were apps that were developed that were like, oh, well, these kind of binaural beats can get you high. You should listen to this one. This one's just like, weed or whatever. So you see little sort of cottage scammy things springing up next to the other things. You've heard people talk on here before. Mike Fitch, who used to be a frequent co-host of mine, a colleague of mine who occasionally still dips in to help with the program. He's talked before about the frustrations with, we live in a part of the country where scented oils are very, very big. And these aromatic oils are supposed to, there are people that will say, chuck out your mood stabilizers and rub this oil on your feet every day, or burn this in a diffuser or whatever. And, it will help to get rid of your bipolar disorder and that kind of a thing. So right away we run into one of the things that's very tricky about this is that, and I have not seen any research on binaural beats, so I can't say whether it's good, bad, or neutral completely. Okay, that's actually one of the problems, lack of research. But the claim that sitting and listening to this thing, this kind of neutral sound while meditating is going to be beneficial, that doesn't sound crazy. In fact, it's not crazy. In fact, sitting and meditating for any amount of time with or without music or sound will actually be good for your mental health. Aromatic oils. You know what? I know a lot of people who actually use those. I buy some essential oils and things like that mostly for air freshening purposes, but it's not that aromatherapy is fake. It's real. There's a whole thing around that, right? So you take these things that sound very reasonable and in fact might have benefit, and probably do have certain benefits, unquestionably. But then what you really want to look at is, first of all, the claim that's being made. So if the person is saying, this is a cure-all, this is wonderful, this is magical, this is, that kind of a thing, that kind of claim, that's what you want to evaluate. Is that claim going to be true? Or is it a gross exaggeration? Or is it just an out-and-out lie, and they're applying this to something that it actually doesn't really apply to at all? Now, I'm going to contrast that to the emergence of ketamine therapy. Ketamine therapy, you've heard people come on this show and talk about it. I talk about it a lot because it is quite remarkably helpful to help people who are going through treatment-resistant depression. And those who have been through it, who I've had on the show, have talked quite a bit and sung its praises in many ways. As that was coming out, one of the things that pinged in my brain was what I just said, which is, where are these claims? And you certainly heard people say, this is a great thing. This is going to cure depression. We're going to, throw away my antidepressants, blah, blah, blah. One of the things, though, that was a good tip that this was something worth evaluating was that the professionals, at least the ones who were the pioneers in this field, they did not say that. In fact, when I had Dr. Stephen Mendel on the program a few years ago, and then several years ago he was on, and then he was on a few years later talking about the ongoing research and things that they're seeing, is that one of the first things he says up front is, he says, this is remarkable. Isn't it wonderful and great that we've discovered this? But this is only meant to be something to supplement and accelerate aggressively help treatment-resistant depression. And many people who go through that continue to take antidepressant medication. And the prediction or the promise, if you will, of those that were ethical purveyors of this treatment would say, well, of course, this is only a tool. Of course, you need therapy. Of course, you're not going to have a complete loss of your depression forever and ever and ever and ever. It's not that you would never hear someone say that, because I did hear some people say that, but those who were involved with the first implementation of this kind of treatment and those that have been involved in the creating ethical considerations and doing trainings around it have never really said that. Okay. And so that was something that said, okay, this is worth being evaluated. Then you could look at the long-term experiences that were being studied and researched. And one of the nice things also about ketamine is that it's been around and been used by anesthesiologists for, 50 years or something with people, and that it was very safe, that we knew that already because it had been observed, that there was a lot of safety, which made it a very much lower risk to try this kind of treatment. And so there was research that was both ongoing and based off research in the past. That's how research is supposed to work. Another thing is that when you would go to people who were big into promoting it and who were big into performing it, like Dr. Mandel, for example, they were aggressively encouraging, they were pushing for there to be actual research being done on that. And so when the people who are really into it know what real research is, and they are wanting that to be done and advocating and pressuring and creating associations that would require people to have higher levels of training and to really look into it, that's another good sign. Because what you'll see, flipping back over to the more snake oil type of approach, the cure-all magic, this is really probably not worth your time kind of thing, what you're going to see there is the opposite. And what I see is kind of a trying to have it both ways. Those people will claim, research shows, they will use these phrases, research shows, we have evidence of this. They'll even use the word empirical as if they know what it means. Empirical studies. But you will never find those. See, there's a difference. If something is really empirically researched and has lots of studies behind it, and you're trying to sell it, you better believe that your website is going to have links and links and links that are easy to find that show you where there's been these peer-reviewed, double-blind, whatever kind of studies that have been done about it. There is going to be research where if you go to where it says there's research and all you find is customer satisfaction surveys, that is one of your hugest red flags right there. And this is where I say they try to have it both ways, because when you push on that and say, well, where's the research? They'll flip and all of a sudden give you an example of anecdotal success and say, well, just talk to people. Now, and by the way, if they also don't have people they don't even have people to talk to, it's like, just talk to people. They'll tell you it works. That's not research, okay? Now, if someone tells me, someone who I know and trust says, we did this and it helped, that is very meaningful, okay? But what expectations do I have going into something? A person saying, for example, that my kids received this treatment and they seem to be a lot better, that is not, I'm sorry, but that's not how medical science works. You might try it because a good friend of yours recommends it. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with trying these things as long as they're not harmful, okay? But the fact is, can I expect that they will work? The same way that a medically researched and evaluated treatment would work, and how it tends to work with this percentage of people versus that percentage of people. We just don't know that if the studies have not been done. And there's really no way around that. That's not how science works. And so we can't say things declaratively, but people really do like to. And I will say, being a human services practitioner, being a therapist who I spend a little bit of time in this space. Those of you who follow me on social media know, not maybe that much. I'm not very good at the social media platforms as much. I forget to put up announcements for new episodes all the time on there. But I'm in there enough and working with my guests when I record the podcast that I feel like I have a healthy toe over here in the stream of human service, TikTok, Instagram type of things, and gotten to know enough to know, oh, okay, I think I kind of know this person, or at least I know how to evaluate if a person's someone who I think is worthwhile to, and I always do my best to make it worthwhile for you that are the listeners to not just have, people come in. I don't do paid interviews or anything like that. The only time that you've ever heard me say that on the show is when I had a sponsorship from an EMDR trainer, and we did a couple of featured episodes. But you'll notice the beginning of those episodes, I identified that we had a sponsorship arrangement. They were giving me access to their training to do my own certification training in exchange for being able to do some advertising on the podcast. I reached out to them because I wanted their training. And as I learned it, I thought it was quite useful, and EMDR is very well researched. And so I decided to share that with y'all. If there's ever anybody who's paying me to share anything like an advertisement, I will. In fact, you have to. You're ethically and legally, I think, obligated to do that on a podcast. And I'll always do that whenever something comes out. But even when I'm just interviewing someone who is gracious enough to give their time, I always want to make sure it's worth your time as the listener. So I do these I kind of try to screen this way. So recapping that, if there's miraculous claims, you always want to evaluate that closely. And if there is a dearth of research and the people saying there is research will not tell you where to find the research, or if the research is just one person or it's customer satisfaction surveys or those kinds of things, that's a huge red flag. And not that the practice is useless necessarily, but it certainly isn't going to be able to be proven to do the things that they say it's going to do. The other thing you have to watch out for is this harmful? There are a lot of things that were actually considered really good practice that turn out to be harmful. And the way that we learn that is through research and through talking to those that were recipients of that treatment over a long period of time, not just talking to them, but administering different surveys and finding out. For example, it's becoming more and more apparent, this kind of leaning back into the autism, is that a lot of individuals who have gone through a process called applied behavioral analysis, which is absolutely something that was clinically encouraged, and still many places practice this. Many of the people who've been through that kind of treatment did not care for it and did not care for the way they were treated. And there is an increasing number of testimonials of people who say that they didn't like that. So therefore, that triggers research questions and then research into the process of applied behavior analysis. And if it is helpful, if it is discriminatory, if it is actually empowering to an autistic individual, or if it is forcing them into a societal role that actually could risk increasing stress and those, kind of depressive symptoms of not fitting in and those types of things. So that's being researched now because we're listening to people, because we're researching things. So basically, it's always worth going and saying, okay, is there anything that's harmful about this thing that someone's saying, particularly if it seems very strange? This might sound like a crazy throwback, but it was not uncommon at one point in history for people to do exorcisms. And we're not just talking about burning a candle and repeating a prayer. We're talking about like physically abusive exorcisms or forcing people to drink, tons of water and to the point where it damages their body and things like that. So, consulting with medical professionals when it comes to something, especially if it's something that seems really, really weird. I've talked before here on the show about how you can get mental health advice. If you go on to like anywhere where it lists therapists, go on to Psychology Today or something, and there will be a feature to where you can call or send an email through the listing. Or if you know people who work in the mental health field, or if you know people who have a good therapist they recommend, you may even end up, if you can afford it, book a session and sit down with a therapist or so. But if you send a couple of emails, if you end, let's say, just even on just a normal online listing of therapists, and you shot off, I don't know, let's say something that's important to you about your kid or about you and your health, shoot off 5 to 10 emails to therapists that you don't know and say, hey, what do you know about this? Do you have anything to say about it? My guess is they're all busy private practitioners. You might not hear back from 100% of them, but if I get that email in my inbox, whether or not it ties in with this person wanting to be my client, if I know anything, I'm one of those that would probably spend a few minutes to evaluate whatever it is they're asking about if I hadn't heard about it and say, here's my impression, or here's what you might want to ask or check, or just some feedback like that. People who work in the field want people to get better. And this goes into another red flag you want to watch out for. So if nobody's heard of it, by the way, that's also kind of a red flag. But this big red flag is the promise that the conspiratorial thinking starts to creep in, and the promise that big something doesn't want you to know this. Big mental health, big pharma, big whatever, big whatever. Now, is it true that the pharmaceutical companies have huge problems and are, yes, of course. And it's a capitalist system with medicine. Is it likely to look for preventative care? Yes, there's all those kinds of problems are out there. But let's look at the flip side of that. If you were a person who said, "Oh, I discovered that if you boil this type of sunflower and turn it into tea, that it will cure any impulses, to start fires. So it cures pyromania." I'm just trying to pick something that's, not. So this dandelion tea will now do this. Or sunflower tea. See, there's a red flag. I couldn't even remember what I was claiming was there. So if you come across this, and let's say that I'm marketing this and I say, oh, and you know what? The government and big pharma and all those people out there, right? They don't want you to know about this because then, therapists don't want you to know that this will cure this because then you'll stop going to pyromania therapy and they won't be able to have clients. And so I always am a little automatically suspicious when things get too conspiratorial because unfortunately conspiratorial thinking goes quickly towards just ugly things. When people start talking about, I don't know why, but you just find that there are really ugly discriminatory thoughts that kind of creep in under this. All of a sudden, you might be looking at something that seems like this sort of interesting conspiracy theory, and then all of a sudden something sexist, something misogynist, racist, anti-Semitism, whatever it is, all of a sudden there's stuff that just like all of a sudden pops up that's like, why is this a part of this, right? So you always have to be careful with conspiratorial thinking at all. But when people say this, one of the biggest red flags to me is when they include all the medical professionals and they say, doctors don't want you to know this. Therapists don't want you to know this, okay? Most of the time, the nurse, the doctor, the therapist, whoever, the caseworker, the person sitting in front of you, they generally are doing this job because they want to help, right? And if I ask around to a couple of different therapists and they say, oh, this mental health thing, yeah, that's kind of a snake oil thing and it hasn't helped anybody that I've ever seen. I would take that seriously because, once again, they probably want their patients to get better. They probably want their clients to improve and to be happy. That's why we do what we do. And if this sunflower tea was really helping everybody to stop setting crazy fires, then yeah, I'd have a link to it on my website, right? Now, is that a perfect rule? No. Even if I put my cynical hat on, a lot of people would be trying to cash in on it, right? Because if this sunflower tea did this, Big Pharma would be selling this tea, right? The person who would list it on their website might also be selling it on their website. So if we put on the cynical capitalistic hat, it seems weird that nobody out there is trying to capitalize on this thing if it's all this really big kept secret, right? So one last thing I want to add about this, which is when you do come across something and it has these crazy claims and no one's ever heard of it and there's just no research on it and there's nothing that you can find about it. Here's what I would like to suggest. When you do look at that, look at it on its merits and say, is there anything about it? Pick it apart and say, if someone says, for example, take all of this out of your diet. Okay, well, we live in a world where there's lots of information and you can go around and you can find out. Go look up, some of the big medical or nutritional organizations and see what they have to say about that kind of thing. It doesn't mean that there's nothing good in it. In fact, if you're going to sell a snake oil fake product, it helps if it has a little nugget of truth in it. That's how cons work, right? So if there is something in there and you're like, you know what? Do I want to try this? Do I want to try shifting my diet in a little bit way? Particularly if it's something that's like, eat more fiber. Well, okay, maybe I will eat more fiber. So it doesn't mean that it's not helpful at all. And this is also where the con artist type of things, or at least the over exuberant people who think they have a cure-all, whatever, zealotry, whatever it is that is behind it. One of the ways that it gets you is it gets into this all or nothing thinking. You have to admit this is good or it's bad. And how could it be bad? Eating more fiber is good, right? So eating more fiber is good, depending on how much you eat, I guess. But it isn't going to cure your fill in the blank to just eat more fiber, most likely, unless your problem is directly related to the lack of fiber in your diet. I guess that there's that too. Bad example, but anyway, the point I'm trying to make is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. The thing can be good in and of itself. That doesn't mean it's going to be a magic cure-all. And it definitely doesn't mean that I need to hand thousands of dollars over to someone just because they're saying that I should have more fiber in my diet. Yeah, I had a researcher on the show a couple of years ago now where there was a study that had indicated that vitamin D might have something to do with mood regularity and depression. And the researcher was on, and it was a fascinating conversation about all the indications from the study. But, and this is another way to tell it's good research, one thing he mentioned several times in the interview was, don't run out and get vitamin D and assume it's going to help just because we had this one study. This study's purpose is to promote other studies that are going to look more at this. Then, I mean, he did add, he said, if you don't have enough vitamin D, should you have more vitamin D? Well, yeah, sure. Vitamin D is not bad for you. So, but if you're going to redefine your whole life and your whole approach to treating your depression around vitamin D, that is premature, right? Not that it can't be useful, but that we don't know what the study will end up leading to in the next study, the next study, the next study. It's frustrating sometimes for us when we really want something to be fixable or we want some kind of a real thing that's going to, but we have to be careful because waiting for things to really establish how they're really doing does take time. And I may not benefit from it today the same way someone will later on when they know it. But the con artists out there and even the well-intentioned people who want to push something in a fanatical way, they come along and push it. And it sounds really, really appealing. So these are just some things to be careful of when you're out there. Evaluate things very carefully. Make sure to ask a few extra questions or do a few extra Googles. Maybe even look up a couple of sites that end with .org or .edu about organizations that have to do with this that are either nonprofits or they are educational, academic and things. That doesn't make them perfect, of course, but it does maybe lead you to some of those more research kind of things. So just be very cautious and evaluate these things as they go. And just remember, the greatest way to stay safe from being conned or tricked at all is if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Thanks for listening. We will have another new episode tomorrow, which will be a great interview with someone. I don't have it in front of me, but all the interviews I've been doing lately have been great, and they've all been with someone. So it is 100% cure-all, magic, guaranteed to be the best podcast you've ever listened to. Just forget all that other stuff I said and believe that. Well, I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.